Located right here in Toronto, this is Cabbagetown. Or rather, a map that I heavily modified of Cabbagetown, one of the city's most historic neighborhoods. To dig deeper, we'll start over in the north end of the neighborhood and sort of make our way from there. Over here is St. James Cemetery, which is a really neat old cemetery. The oldest one still in use in the whole city, in fact. This is a tranquil, nice area to take a somewhat historic stroll, and is where all the dead people live. Nah, JK, that's mean. Not all the dead people live there. Some are over here, as just south beyond this tree belt, which runs along Rosedale Valley Road, which is this road that borders the neighborhood to the east, is another cemetery called Toronto Necropolis, which is a Gothic cemetery, and another stunning, well-kept historic place that feels almost as though it's frozen in time. Definitely somewhere to check out. That feeling is enhanced by the charming, if compact, old and preserved Victorian homes that bound the cemetery to the north and primarily west. Those historic, lovely, expensive areas stretch throughout the blue. There's even quaint cottages thrown in there as well that, in themselves, all perhaps feel more like elements of a quaint old Victorian town than a trek away from the skyscrapers of one of the largest and fastest growing cities in North America. But they are, quite literally, an historic Victorian enclave virtually right downtown in perhaps one of the most sought-after, expensive cities in the world. I mean, I suppose the urban-like density sort of gives it away to some extent, but what else would you expect from some of the closest homes to all that downtown has to offer, and a sizable area of them at that? In fact, this is the largest continuous preserved Victorian area in all of North America, everyone. It would be even larger, except they had to tear down lots of historic homes in order to make space for subsidized housing projects to accommodate residents in the much poorer areas right near Cabbagetown, which, as a matter of fact, are some of the poorest areas in the whole city. This area of the city is pretty well documented as being one of the most distinctly divided areas in all of Toronto. This is kind of one of the things that, although not exclusively, Cabbagetown is known for. As you can see here on Gerard Street, affluent, pretty ideally placed Cabbagetown homes that stretch north are adjacent to the gritty, dense, low-income apartments of Regent Park that continue on a significant distance south, both right next to each other, yet it's so divided that it's even clear from a satellite image. The same is true for the low-income high-rises of St. Jamestown, over to the northwest, which is the densest neighborhood in all of Canada. As well as those two, there's also the somewhat infamous area of Moss Park, farther south. Although much of those areas, particularly Regent Park, are and have improved massively, the stark divide still lingers. It didn't used to be so divided, though. This whole area has a history of being working class, and at some points, even quite literally dirt poor, which is somewhat prevalent to this day, as I touched on before. All the neighborhoods around, including Cabbagetown, more or less endured those struggles together in past times. But as Toronto thrived, Cabbagetown, placed in a great location, and which had been able to retain its charming Victorian homes, eventually did so too, leaving much of its former working-class, impoverished strife behind in exchange for more upper-class affluence. Moving back over to the map now, another area that those tree-lined homes are on the fringes of is Riverdale Park, which is a pretty nice, decently spacious park. Right beside the park, however, is perhaps the neighborhood's, and potentially one of the city's, for that matter, main attractions, Riverdale Farm, which, as is suggested by the name, is a 3-hectare farm that features tranquil ponds as well as delightful, somewhat windy trails, which stretch through lovely, charming greenery roughly along the eastern part of the farm, which is all really great. There's also all kinds of exotic animals there. JK, not really. There's just a bunch of dumb farm animals, primarily. I mean, what do you expect? It's not a zoo. But it used to be. Yep, that's right. This place used to be Riverdale Zoo. But then they got some more land east in the more spacious Scarborough, away from the core sometime in the 70s, and made a much bigger, better zoo. Overall, though, Riverdale Farm is absolutely terrific, and is genuinely one of the best places to go for a day trip in the whole city. Whether you're especially into the animals, or just want to relax in a lovely, tranquil environment and partially feel as though you're not in the city anymore, knowing that you can simply opt back into the hustle and bustle just a short distance away whenever you wish to. Just below the farm, in an area that's increasingly becoming somewhat of a festival of tree-lined attractions, is mostly open green space, flanked by trees in Riverdale Park West, which stretches east to Bayview Avenue along the eastern border of the neighborhood, one of its largest streets. It also stretches down to River Street, along the south side of which are a few compact, sort of run-down, isolated homes, as well as some other things consistent of, but not limited to, apartments and some trees. River Street winds along a short distance through Cabbagetown, until it reaches the major street that acts as the southern border for the eastern part of the neighborhood, Gerard Street. Now, we've already touched on this part of Gerard Street, which is more or less made up of contrasting, expensive homes. As you venture farther west along, it's kind of similar, except the areas in white are generally primarily commercial and other, not really primarily residential anymore. This continues along the major street of Parliament, or at least this far along it, which, I might add, has some very cool bars and restaurants along it that dip below ground level. Otherwise, though, it's just the normal hustle and bustle of a major street and shopping area, except the buildings and restored charming homes turned into shops that accommodate the stores and whatnot are extra old, like most things in this neighborhood, which on the whole is great, as it gives the place's appeal, or at the very least, rather distinct variety. Similar dynamics are also true to an extent for the vibrant major streets of Dundas and Carlton, which stretch along in the neighborhood until Sherbourne Street on the western border. Dundas apparently has a bit of a reputation for being a little sketchy around there, though, so keep vigilant, everyone. In between those lively streets, shown in blue, are yet more expensive Victorian homes and tree-lined residential streets, those even closer to the pre-mentioned buildings. Sherbourne Street on the western border is meh, probably the poorest stretch of the neighborhood on the whole. Lots of subsidized housing along it, relatively speaking. There is certainly other stuff along it as well, even including homes. Overall, though, Sherbourne is somewhat infamous and is known for being kind of sketchy relative to the city overall. This stretch of it in Cabbagetown is no exception. Otherwise, this stretch along Shooter Street to the south, and this one along Wellesley, more towards the north, aren't really the greatest. Neither is parts of the aforementioned Gerard, or this part of Parliament Street. Why? Mostly lots of subsidized housing right along the neighborhood borders. Oh, and the little places in pink are schools, but we're not going to get into that now. This video is long enough already, and that's lame compared to everything else that this neighborhood has to offer. Alright, so that's Cabbagetown. Yay. In summary, it's really old and there's lots of nice, preserved Victorian homes on very expensive land, almost intermingling at points with some of the poorest areas of the whole city. Basically, the eastern portion of Cabbagetown has more greenery and attractions, while the western part has more things. Kind of. Sort of.